Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Welcome, welcome, welcome. People coming. We're going to get started in about a minute. It's good to see everyone. It's been a while since we've had a Race, Rage, and Fear. The meeting is being recorded, just FYI. So if you don't want to be on the screen, you can turn off your camera. And if you want to say something privately, you can send it to me directly if you want to say something anonymously, and then I'll report it to the group without disclosing your name. I am going to ask everyone to introduce yourself in the chat. I'll go ahead and asking name, occupation, or interest, and to complete the sentence, tonight I'd like to understand ... and I'll put that in the chat. Awesome. So if you could just take a little time to introduce us to you in the chat. I put in there what we're asking, but of course you can modify that as needed. But the name, occupation, or interest, and complete the sentence, tonight I'd like to understand . I'm gonna check my email. We have about 50 people to sign up, and we know usually not everyone who signs up comes. I just want to make sure no one's trying to get in before we get started. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started just because, don't want to punish the punctual. Thank you all so much for joining us on Race, Rage, and Fear. This is something that we've been doing since 2016. 2016, after the election, I found myself in a really weird place because my church is pretty awesome and it's also pretty diverse: Black, white, straight, gay, younger, young plus. And like, what do we do? I had people that voted on both sides of the aisle, and I have to pastor, and I had people that were trying to figure out what our country stands for. Where do we stand on race, and how does that work spiritually? And a lot of my Black friends, with good reason, were saying it's not my job to teach white people. And in my calling, in my profession, I felt, well, maybe I can maybe that's part of my job. I mean, I get paid from a church that's half white, half black, and the church is a pretty safe place to have those really difficult conversations. And so we pride ourselves on doing that. We don't have the patty cake version of racism in our church. We're very honest and real. We also have these conversations from a place of understanding that systemic racism exists, and it's real, it's fact. So we don't argue, we don't go back and forth on whether or not microaggressions are real, whether or not racism is real. And so just understand that if you're in this space, we're not saying you have to agree with me, but that's where we're coming from. So we're not going to spend time trying to prove that our country is racist. We come from with the thought that our country is racist, and what are we going to do? What are we going to do with that? With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've been behind this computer all day, so I'm making sure there's nothing crazy about to pop up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get into just our ground rules while we do this, while we're here. And if you're just joining us, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat. When we have these type of meetings, there's usually two conversations going on, and I think that's awesome. There's one in the video and there's one in the chat. And I'll monitor, and there's some veterans here and some members from the church. So if you see anything in the chat that I missed, please let me know, and we will acknowledge that. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can start our work. All right, can everybody see that? We're good. Race, rage, and fear. The ground rules for discussion. We started these in person. It's kind of dope that we can do this online, but we do miss the in-person stuff, but at least now we can open it up to other people. So some of these may not apply to online as much, but it is what it is. We're going to listen actively and attentively. We're going to ask for clarification. If we're confused, we're not going to interrupt one another. We're going to critique ideas, not people. So the way that we're not going to interrupt one another, what we do in school, if anyone has taken any online classes, we use the word stack. So that means if I'm talking and you want to be next in line to talk, in the chat, just type stack, and then I'll go through the list and I'll see who's next, and we'll go in that order so that we don't have to figure that out. I don't know why stack's the word, but that's the word that we use, and so we'll do that. Don't offer opinions without supporting evidence. Avoid put downs. Don't put down yourself. It's uncomfortable for the rest of us. And don't put down one another, even if it's a joke. We're adults. Take responsibility for the quality of the discussion. Build on one another's comments. Work towards shared understanding. Don't monopolize the discussion. We have all been on those meetings when that one person just won't be quiet. But we only have 2 hours, and I don't want to call anybody out. I will, but I don't want to. Speak from your own experience without generalizing. If you are offended by anything said, please acknowledge it immediately. Don't sit there and pout and whine and again, we're adults. Anything that you wish to share with the group anonymously, please chat with me directly. Reverend Derek is in charge. This is really important and in person. But on here we can put people out, and that's just in case there's any trolls or any type of negativity or anything that's just too out there. Just establish the authority. I'm a preacher, but I'm not like I'm the only one that's right type of person. I'm very open-minded, but just to establish that no one can come in and take over the space that we've created. Hopefully you have put that information in the chat. Feel free to look and see who's all in the room. I love networking and meeting new people. And so we love the opportunity to do that. All right, a couple people in the waiting room. So, and also you can save the chat later. Everyone who signed up and came to the room, you're going to get the slides later. We're going to watch a video. You're going to get links to the video later in an email. You're also going to get supplemental videos. There's like 4 I wanted to show, but we're only here for 2 hours. So some stuff that you can watch later. And you'll also get the public portion of the chat, a file that you can, anything that people put in the chat, if there's a resource, if there's something you think of, please do take advantage of the chat. Am I playing the slideshow? Is that better? Also, okay, I didn't realize I wasn't playing it. Sorry about that. So, goodness. My participant, can someone read that for me? My participant file is right in the middle, so I can't read all the words. This is just the quote.
Hi, it's TK. I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much, TK.
There's a profound misunderstanding of the nature of the hatred between Black and white. The root of the Black man's hatred is rage, and he does not so much hate white men. He simply wants them out of his way, out of his children's way. And the root of the white man's hatred is terror, a bottomless and nameless terror which focuses on his dread figure, an entity which lives only in his mind. That's a quote by James Baldwin.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And again, that's where the title comes from: race, rage, and fear. We feel like in this country, race is something that divides. Too often people think that if you don't talk about race, then we don't have the division. I think the division comes because we don't talk about race. And we have no idea what the other culture, what the other group is dealing with, is thinking about. We started Race, Rage, and Fear to do these 3 things: to expose, to educate on, and to end systems of white supremacy. I mean, that's it. A lot of people, if you don't know, you don't know. For a lot of us, the 100th year anniversary of the massacre at Tulsa was a shock to a lot of people. And I was shocked at the number of people, Black, white, and otherwise, who had never heard of it. Because I grew up in a community where we talked about what happened in Tulsa. We talked about Black Wall Street. And so for a lot of people that this is new to, and a lot of the information that we've seen, I thought it was a perfect opportunity, especially now after Juneteenth becoming a national holiday and where our country is, where we can talk about what has happened, one incident of government sanctioned, not only physical attack, but the theft of Black wealth, and what that means to us 100 years later, what it means, and that's just one city, right? And what that means in other places. So I'm gonna go ahead and show a video. It's called Tulsa 1921, an American Tragedy, and that's gonna be the foundation. Usually, if you've been to Race, Rage, and Fear before, usually I start with a PowerPoint presentation where I give, the hard-hitting facts, and I prepared a presentation. Unfortunately, I found videos that did it better, that had, videos and interviews with survivors. And I put the ego aside and said, I don't reinvent the wheel. Let's use what's really good out there. So just give me a second to stop that. And we're going to share the screen. And then after and while you watch the video, watch it in terms of what is the action today to respond to what happened then. Don't watch it with the lens of, oh my God, that was so bad. It's so horrible. It makes me so sad. I mean, that's awesome. And it is bad. It is horrible. It is sad. But we can't do nothing with that, right? So what's the action? Like what is the response from that? So just give me a second. Why everything is so weird today. Zoom. I do this all day long with no problem. And as soon as I get an audience, here we go. And again, I'll share the link with you later. Oops.
They've given notice out on the street.
Can everyone see and hear?
Town, they're killing all of the Black people.
Yes. Identity was destroyed. Their wealth was taken from them.
It looked as if it was Hiroshima. Atomic bomb had gone off. What few trees were left had no leaves. They were just charred.
And then the story was suppressed until almost now.
The Greenwood District, or what it becomes known as Black Wall Street.
These are people who own their own homes, they had their own businesses. It was a vibrant community.
What happened in 1921 on May 31st through June the 1st was 18 hours of sheer terror.
I never want to see anything like that again. Never.
We don't know who fires the first shot, but that begins a bloodbath. African Americans are attacked in their homes. They are machine gunned down in the streets. They woke up to the sound of bullets hitting their homes.
Smoke and flames are everywhere.
They set fire to the curtains so the houses will burn. Airplanes, the morning of June 1st, flying over the city and dropping turpentine bombs.
You were seeing them get away with murder. Murder.
It wasn't the only event that took place during a period known as the Red Summer of 1919.
Ultimately, it's all covered up. There are generations of folks who grew up in Tulsa who never heard about it. There's the immediate aftermath of the race massacre, and there is rebuilding in that period of time.
The same will, ingenuity, and determination of Black people to make a way out of nowhere. The charred remains of their hopes, the embers of their dreams, and yet from that wreckage, they rebuilt.
And we believe very strongly that Black Tulsans deserve truth, reparations, and repair.
Good evening to you. I'm Gail King. 100 years ago today, one of the ugliest chapters in American history took place. The massacre of as many as 300 Black people by their white neighbors and the destruction of the Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Greenwood was a source of pride for Blacks back in 1921. Famed educator Booker T. Washington coined the business district the Negro Wall Street. because it was so prosperous and rich with many Black-owned businesses. Tonight, we will explore what happened that day. What was behind the single worst incident of racial violence in American history? Survivors, descendants, and historians try to explain why it happened and how the city and the country still struggle to move on from this tragedy. So here's a question. What did happen on May 31st, 1921?
The Greenwood District was a segregated residential and economic district because it had to be, because of legal segregation that prevailed, not just in Tulsa, but really all over much of the United States.
They built schools, they built churches, they were educated, they were organized, they had social clubs. It was a vibrant community. They had their own businesses.
These are mostly small businesses, all concentrated in this 35 square block area that abutted downtown Tulsa, separated by the Frisco tracks.
But there was tremendous resentment, white resentment to the economic success of Greenwood. Whites understood that economic prosperity would ultimately lead to questions of racial equality, social equality. Racial equality, social equality was a non-starter. Segregation was the rule of the land.
What was life like in Greenwood then? I asked two survivors of the 1921 massacre. Viola Fletcher is 107.
Well, we had friends and played outside and visit with neighbors and was happy there with our parents. Just loved being there.
And 106-year-old Leslie Benningfield Randall. What was it like before the men came in with guns? What were there stores? Was there movies?
It was getting to be a pretty nice place. They had theater and they had other places of recreation and they had churches. And they came in and tore it all down.
There were approximately 200 businesses in Greenwood circa 1921. And not one of those businesses are left standing.
The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre occurs, triggered, catalyzed by an event between two teenagers, a Black teenage boy, Dick Rowland, 19 years old, who shined shoes downtown, a white girl, Sarah Page, 17 years old, who operated an elevator in a downtown building called the Drexel Building.
We don't know exactly what actually happens, but upon entering, we think he may have tripped and bumped into the white elevator operator, Sarah Page. She screamed.
The clerk from a nearby store comes to her rescue, and Dick Rowland did what any normal African American would have done. He ran. And he ran to Greenwood. Before the day was over, he was arrested and brought to the county jail, which, of course, is on the south side of the tracks in the midst of the white business district.
The Tulsa Tribune published an article entitled "Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator."
The newspaper, the white newspapers, implies that there needs to be a lynching tonight. And so Black World War I veterans come down to the courthouse to protect this young man from being lynched.
One of the white men in the crowd attempts to disarm one of the, we believe, Black veterans. A shot is fired, it hits a white bystander, and they begin firing upon the Black men.
In the words of a number of survivors of the massacre, all hell broke loose after that. The violence lasted roughly 16 hours. Black men in the Greenwood community put up a vigorous, albeit short-lived, defense. They were outnumbered, outgunned.
The sheriff has deputized a number of white citizens who have no training in law enforcement, mob control. They have now been given legal permission to participate in mayhem, looting and murdering.
Some of the people in the Greenwood community had fine things like pianos and china and so forth.
I saw them break in people's houses and just destructive. That's all I saw, just destruction.
And they would give a notice out on the street, leave town, they're killing all of the black people.
My mother looked out the front door and she saw 4 men with torches walking from the street sidewalk to our house. And all of a sudden she says, all of you get up under the bed, quick, quick. And all of us scrambled. They came in and set fire to the curtains. And one stepped on my fingers, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to be sure to stop me, because she could tell I was fixing to holler because it hurt.
People are shooting guns and killing people and all. If we don't leave, they'll do us that way.
Many eyewitnesses report that planes dropped what I'll call incendiary devices on the community. So these would have been nitroglycerin or kerosene bombs that caused the flames to spread more rapidly and burn more brilliantly. So this had a devastating impact on the community.
Men came in and started shooting in. I do remember a lot of people being murdered.
These people escaped their homes. Some are shot down in the street, and others are gathered by the white mob and marched, in my grandfather's case, to the convention hall.
They were stripped of their civil rights. Black men, women, and children were forced to leave their homes, and they are forced with their hands raised to walk, to be paraded through the streets,
taken to internment centers throughout the city, very much like people of Japanese ancestry were interned during World War II.
I would say it's not just a massacre. This was intentional and systematic. What occurred is a military-style assault on a civilian community.
Do you think about that day a lot, or do you try never to think about it?
Oh no, I think about it every day. I think it'll be something I'll never forget. The people getting killed had to give up our home and all. And
I want the world to know I never want to see anything else like that anymore. And I hope it never happens again.
The destruction of Greenwood left behind rubble and ashes in its wake, but it also caused harm to generations of descendants who lost more than their ancestors and material wealth. They lost a legacy of success that is hard to imagine or quantify.
My earliest memory of hearing about the Dreamland Theater was in high school when my mother mentioned it to me. And it wasn't like she talked in depth about what happened. It was our family owned the Dreamland Theater. They were the first Black Tulsans to have a car, but how they lost everything was never really discussed. I'm Danya Backus, the CBS News correspondent and descendant of Black Wall Street. My great-great-grandparents, John and Lula Williams, owned the Dreamland Theater, the Williams Confectionery, and an auto garage. John and Lula Williams were the picture of the American dream. The Dreamland Theater was a 750-seat theater, and it did not just show silent movies, but apparently it had acts, they had boxing matches. My great-great-grandmother Lula actually had 2 other locations. So the Dreamland Theater was this entertainment hub for Tulsa, but it also was, I think, the beginning of an empire.
My name is John Rogers Jr. I'm the co-CEO of Ariel Investments. My ties to Tulsa start with the fact that my great-grandfather, J.B. Stratford, owned the Stratford Hotel that was burned down during the famous Tulsa Race Massacre 100 years ago. J.B. Stratford was an extraordinary entrepreneur, someone who had this knack of building businesses and creating enormous wealth. The Stratford Hotel at its peak was the largest African-American owned hotel in the United States. Not only did it have this 54-room hotel that was very large for its time, but it had a pool hall, it had a cabaret, it had restaurants.
I'm Danya Backus in Tulsa, Oklahoma, uncovering the history of Black Wall Street.
To know that I'm a part of this history and I'm able to tell the story, it has taken on a new meaning and responsibility for me.
This is where the Dreamland Theater was, right here. And now it's everywhere.
Even now, as I talk to elders of the family about what happened, even cousins who grew up in Tulsa, many of them are now just starting to put together all of the pieces.
This is the pillar that pays homage to our family, the W.D. Williams.
And when you ask, why wasn't it talked about? Many of them don't know.
This is David Williams here.
The assumption is that it was just too painful to relive those memories. My great-grandfather, he did talk about it in the community, and he was one of the first survivors to be interviewed.
Woke up the next morning, all this shooting started over. You remember getting shot at when you ran across the street? Oh yeah, you could hear bullets singing down the street. Okay.
Hearing that firsthand, it hit me in a way that reading about it is one thing, but I think when you actually hear it, and you hear it from someone who you know is a part of the family, it impacts you differently.
My great-grandfather talks about in his memoir really happened that day. He said, I was sitting in the window of the lobby looking westward. I saw an airplane approaching the hotel from the west. It came sailing like a huge bird in the direction of the hotel, about 200 feet above the ground. And just before it reached the hotel, it swerved a little and fired through the transoms and plate windows. J.B. Stratford not only lost all of the property that he owned and the Stratford Hotel, but I think most importantly, psychologically, and I understand this as an entrepreneur, he'd put his heart and soul into that hotel. And to see it destroyed overnight was just gut-wrenching. And when he came to Chicago afterwards, he had these dreams of trying to recreate his success that he'd had in Tulsa. And to be able to build a new hotel and build new pool halls and have things that are successful. And he never was able to remotely achieve the success that he had in Tulsa.
W.D. Williams, my great-grandfather, talks about sleeping in a tent for about 6 months until they actually started rebuilding. The Dreamland Theater was rebuilt. The Williams building where the confectionery and where they lived, that was rebuilt. In order for them to be able to rebuild the Dreamland Theater on Black Wall Street, they had to basically sell the other 2 theaters. So they were able to rebuild, but it was never what it was pre the massacre. Hatred and jealousy wiped away our family's chance of generational wealth. I could have been an heir to an empire, and that was all wiped away.
I'm in the investment business and understand the magic of compound interest. That $125,000 hotel and the property that J.B. Stratford had in 1921, 100 years later, it would be worth well over $100 million. Broadly speaking, it would have been transformative for opportunities in our family. There's very little multi-generational wealth in the African-American community. We haven't had that chance to be able to leave inheritances and have family members living off of the dividends of the work that their ancestors accomplished.
It makes me angry to know that so many people went out of their way to make sure that this history was not learned about. It makes me angry to know that my ancestors had to hold on to that trauma for so long as well. I do think we need to be talking about it more. I also do think that it's really scary to know and to feel like there are still some fears that I know they experienced that I still experience today. To know that that hatred and jealousy still lives in some people.
This idea that you could have this extraordinary success story where African Americans were fully participating in our capitalist democracy. No one at the time dreamed it could just all go away overnight. that it could be firebombed and destroyed. And there's so many challenges that continue to face our community. We have to remember this history and inspire all of us to fight even harder for economic and social justice.
The Tulsa massacre did not happen in a vacuum. Between 1917 and 1923, thousands of Black people were killed, their homes and businesses destroyed, and as many as 26 race massacres across the country. In 1919, civil rights activist and writer James Weldon Johnson called it the Red Summer. That term came to represent an era of violence and bloodshed.
The Red Summer of 1919 was coined that because of the lynchings, because of the deaths of so many Black people.
In the years just prior to the Red Summer, there was almost 500,000 African Americans that came up in the first wave of the Great Migration.
You saw Black people fanning out from Mississippi up to Chicago and along the Delta, from Georgia and Alabama up to Detroit, from North Carolina up to New York, from Louisiana over to Los Angeles, and there was tremendous tension.
The massacres during the Red Summer weren't necessarily isolated to one part of the country. They really occurred in the South, New England, the Midwest, the Plains states, the Pacific Northwest. Racial violence can be seen in nearly every state in the Union.
Remember, 15 or thereabout, with Birth of a Nation, a cinematic portrayal of Black men with unrequited desire to rape white women. They can't keep to themselves sexually. As a result of that, there's a buzz in the atmosphere. The Ku Klux Klan is on the rise.
You have the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, screening the film in the White House. This is the messaging that was coming from the White House.
In 19 months of war, we have sent 2 million men overseas and have suffered 350,000 casualties.
If Black people supported the American war effort, perhaps that would create white goodwill. Perhaps Black people would experience an elevation in status in America.
Black men went off to World War I. They saw what could be. They understood the significance of democracy.
We see these Black veterans returning to America expecting the same kind of freedom because they've been in defense of American democracy.
But what we saw was the opposite. Instead of white goodwill, we saw white lynch mobs and white mobs attacking Black communities.
And one of the tensions was that you got a lot more Black people in place when you came back than when you left. And what's that? Oh, they took my job? Oh, what's that? They're occupying space in the culture that used to be occupied by me financially and economically, in mills and in shops.
There was a great majority of white citizens who saw Black people as, who are you to have that house, to have that college degree, to build that school, to not clean my house? Who are you to wear some of the finest clothes? It was more of, you're not supposed to have, but I am.
So whether it was these soldiers returning home, if it was African Americans that had attained some level of power, or that perhaps dated white women, any incidents that whites, and especially poor whites, considered to be kind of a threat to their territory was often a spurring factor.
One of the deadliest, quote unquote, race riots occurred in Chicago.
In Chicago in 1919 was an African-American boy named Eugene Williams, who had floated from what was considered black water into white water.
Eugene was swimming. He inadvertently crossed the 29th Street, barrier that separated Black and white communities, swimming.
And the white beachgoers ended up stoning him to death. And he was really just a child.
Because of the stoning to death set off several days of conflagration between white and Black.
They were just yelling at us. All of a sudden, I heard my uncle say, "Here they come." And when he said that, it meant that the white folks were coming down 35th Street.
And 23 black people dead, 15 white people dead. Black people are not taking it lying down. Returning soldiers and veterans would grab their guns and rifles to defend themselves and to not be victims of violence in this country.
Even somewhere north and somewhere kind of considered progressive like Chicago still had these kind of invisible lines of where Black people were allowed to be and not allowed to be. Elaine, Arkansas, it's a unique case. It's likely that over 200 people died in what's known as the Elaine Massacre. Many of the sharecroppers in the region were historically not given enough pay for their cotton when it came time to sell, and so they formed their own union, which was seen as an uprising by the local white landowners. So it became kind of a manhunt throughout the town and throughout the countryside. These are hardworking families that were being gunned down in the street for wanting to organize their labor and receive more equitable pay.
Black people became target practice. Women, children, men, until the military came in and brought it to a halt. There was a hearing afterward of African-American men accused of starting this event. And it took the NAACP to come in and to fight for them so that they ultimately were given their freedom.
You can drive through Rosewood, Florida in about 15 seconds with no clue about the ugly American story that happened.
In Rosewood, Florida, 1923, a man was accused of attempting to rape a white woman. The result was that a group of white citizens went to confront this man at his home, the threat of violence and death, and ultimately they destroyed the entire Black community.
You could hear them shooting. You could hear people screaming, hollering. You could see fire burning, the light from the fire from a distance. We knew that what they were doing. They were burning up people's homes and killing them.
There was a thriving Black community in this Rosewood area, and they killed several people, and many of the people had to leave their homes and run to the railroad tracks. And ultimately, many of the people who were killed were buried in mass grave.
But I still can't figure out yet the reason for them to burn our home. Because my mother was there with 6 kids.
A lot of the information that we're learning about these incidents are from oral histories of people that were there. We thought there was maybe 24 events during the Red Summer. We now know of almost 40.
What happens during Red Summer of 1919, none of that should be a surprise, and even where we are today, because the issue of race is still a lingering issue in this nation.
How did Tulsa deal with the aftermath of the killing and destruction on May 31st and June 1st? Black and white Tulsans did not talk about the massacre for different reasons, but off and on, there was a rebuilding.
I would describe the rebuilding of Greenwood immediately after the race massacre as one of the great heroic stories in American history. Can you imagine having your business and your home destroyed and the people who do it are never prosecuted, never held accountable?
There wasn't much left but smoldering embers. Fortunately, though, the human spirit reigned supreme.
To the same men who just lost their own loved ones, lost their own businesses, those individuals came back to worship and they restored our basement. And our basement was a central hub until the rest of Greenwood was developed.
Immediately after the massacre, there was an effort by the city to extend the fire code, which would have made it cost prohibitive for many people to rebuild in the community. Fortunately, we had a lawyer in the community called B.C. Franklin. B.C. Franklin challenged those efforts to extend the fire code successfully. He represented a number of massacre victims with their legal claims as well. So the community fought on every front to rebound and to rebuild.
Federal troops were sent to Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 to put down race riots that had ended in the destruction of the Negro section of the city.
The city labeled what happened a riot instead of what it was, which was a massacre.
This was not just some casual journalistic term that was tossed around. It was done explicitly to keep us from getting the needed funds
to rebuild.
Those insurance companies did not pay out on those policies due to the fact that the event was classified as a riot versus being a massacre. Many of the families who had businesses outside of Tulsa, like the Dreamland Theater, they had a couple of locations outside of Tulsa as well, they were able to have money, income to come in. However, all of the businesses in Greenwood who had insurance, they did not get paid out due to these events.
We now have minutes from the Chamber of Commerce from that era, from the City Commission. And what you see in the days immediately after it happened was widespread recognition by city leaders throughout the community that this was a major source of shame and embarrassment for our city. And the best way for Tulsa to be able to move forward was just not to talk about it at all, to act like it never happened.
I used to be a reporter for the CBS affiliate here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I remember going, how come nobody's talking about this? This used to be the West Archer lunchroom right here. It's the only remembrance, but if you look up what used to be the lunchroom is now the minor league ballpark.
When we say the Greenwood community, we have to be very clear that what existed at the time of the massacre was 40 blocks. Now that's down to half a block.
Well, I think there are two phases in the history of Greenwood that you have to focus on. There's the immediate aftermath of the race massacre, and there is rebuilding in that period of time. But then you have urban renewal hit Tulsa in the 60s and the 70s. And that's the time when you see entire neighborhoods bulldozed, which are still vacant land today. That's when you see a highway built right through the middle of Greenwood that's still there today.
As a reporter, you notice it. Why are the folks who live in North Tulsa not as affluent as the folks who live in South Tulsa?
And what we see happening in much of Greenwood south of the highway is not Black owned. We see a lot of development, a lot of what they call gentrification. I like to call it what it is, land theft.
A lot of land was stolen from us. Then you burn us down and we rebuild accordingly. And then you come and tear us back down. I mean, current day, our whole goal is to protect and preserve what we currently have.
In order for the city to receive their upgrades, they had to... When I came to the Greenwood district, there really wasn't much going on. Not nearly as much that's going on now. There's new buildings going up. I just don't know how much of the Black community has any influence on what goes up.
They're building white-owned businesses that are going to benefit white Tulsans and not the Black community, which has been pushed further out north into a community that has not received any investment for decades.
I actually own and operate Rose Tax Solutions, and we're a full-service boutique firm located right on Greenwood Avenue, across the street from my dad. He has a bail bonds company, and 2 doors down from my nieces who operate a restaurant, Wanda J's, and across the street from a coffee shop where my cousin is a co-owner.
We have 26 Black-owned businesses in those buildings. So to go from 600 in 1921 to 26 is nowhere near what we had.
For Black businesses and leaders not to be in place in order to actually get contracts accepted to build and construct again, you take away a lot from a group of individuals who cannot build, who don't have that same opportunity. That's our goal, is to own. We don't want to keep renting.
How weird would it be if they build this up and everybody comes to see Black Wall Street, but it doesn't have that feel of Black Wall Street? I would hope that the Black community that's here in Tulsa would have a say in the rebuilding of what was theirs that they originally built up.
Wow. I go to City Hall every Wednesday since September 2018. Every Wednesday. So that the world know we demand reparations now.
Different people define reparations in different ways. There's the more traditional idea of cash payments to people. The challenge with that for me is where that cash comes from. So I don't support that. But then there's a different definition of reparations, which is acknowledging the disparities that do exist and working to reconcile those and address the underlying causes of those disparities.
We're not seeking a specific number in the lawsuit. We're just simply asking that the court give us the opportunity to bring in the experts to tell the court and the world what would it take to put the community back where it would have been, but for the massacre and the continuing harm.
To have it look like it did back before They destroyed it before they put this interstate highway through the heart of our Greenwood community. That's what it looks like to me. A self-contained place of Black entrepreneur excellence.
Man, a true rebuild would be where we own the land, we're able to build, we're circulating the dollar, it's inclusive, we're just booming again, and we're thriving. We have like that strong community. That would be amazing for Tulsa.
In 2019, Oklahoma passed a law requiring the Tulsa Race Massacre to be taught in schools. That is a huge step forward for Tulsans, both Black and white, who grew up never knowing what happened nearly 100 years before. One thing is clear, though, it's important, very important to dig up.
All right, we're going to stop there. I think we got a pretty good overview of what happened. Just a couple of things I want to draw forth that weren't included in the video. One, Tulsa in 1921 was, Oklahoma was a state in the Union. When Black people first made their way to Tulsa, it was a territory. And as the country expanded west, there were resources, free land for indigenous individuals. When Oklahoma was first settled, it was mostly indigenous people that had been removed from their lands further east and south, and Black people. And so as it started to be settled, Black people found cheap and or sometimes free land that they could come and occupy. And there were wealthy Blacks who bought the land where Greenwood sat, and through cooperative economics helped to lure other Black people so that they could start businesses and build homes. And this took place all over Oklahoma. I mean, there were Black cities and towns all over Oklahoma. And when it became an idea to work towards statehood, the Black people understood if we become a state, there could be the racist people from the South coming to bring Jim Crow into Oklahoma. And they were not about that life. So they literally sent delegations to Washington, D.C. to fight against the idea of statehood. Unfortunately, they found oil in Oklahoma. And we know our country. Oil, money. Tulsa became, in 1907, I think, Teddy Roosevelt signs Oklahoma into statehood. People came in, the oil industry came, Tulsa becomes a booming city. And what happens is, as at first where Greenwood was, people didn't care. It was, north of the city, it was far enough away not to bother anyone. But as growth happened, guess what? You start to realize, this 40 block enclave is in the way of our progress. And so they went to the leaders, they went to the Black people in Greenwood and said, we want you to move further north. Give up your businesses, sell us your houses, your land, probably at a deficit, and, move further north. Well, these people have been there before statehood. They have built, they have worked, they have lives, they push back. So what happens on the 31st of May and 1st of June is bigger than just this white man, this Black boy may have done something to this white woman in the elevator. It becomes an opportunity for the state, for the city, for the government to get what they wanted. And we also know the really interesting part, the young man who was in the center of all of that disappeared. Historians, we have no idea what happened to him. We believe that he got out of Tulsa, but we don't know what happened to that. He would have been on that elevator. He was a shoe shine boy in a downtown for the oil industry. He made so much money shining rich people's shoes. He had a diamond encrusted belt buckle. And the elevator, the bathroom was on the 4th floor. So he rode this elevator every day he worked and needed to use the restroom. So he would have seen this girl day after day after day after day. So some historians believe there could have been a romantic relationship. And again, you're not supposed to do that. And how do you break up a relationship if you're not supposed to have one? Or it could have just been what, some people think he bumped into her, he stepped on her shoe. Some people say the elevator may have jerked and he grabbed her. But all that to say that's what led to this. And in 1921, unfortunately, not too far removed from today, all you had to do was say the white girl was attacked or raped or in Emmett Till's looked at, and it was justified violence. So I wanted to put that out there. After watching the video, let's take 3 people that are willing to give us 1 minute of feeling, commentary, something that you thought. After watching the video, what do you feel? Anybody want to share? Or anything stand out in your mind or stand out? Yes, feel free to share in chat. I'll go once, go twice.
I'll jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. A lot of things stood out to me, but what stood out to me the most is my own ignorance of what happened. And I'm not young. I'm almost 50. So, and I know that schools have changed somewhat since then, but I still don't think that they're teaching this stuff. And if some people have their way, it's never going to be taught. And I find that so, and thank you. I find that so incredibly disturbing that this is our history. This is American history. And yet, in order to learn any of this, we have to seek it out or, take an American history or African American history course instead of an American history course. So that's something that just really stands out.
Thank you for that.
And I was going to share, every time I watch pieces like this, you can imagine it's like an up and down sort of kind of thing. When you ask that question, the immediate word that resonates me is that I'm angry. But when I really think about that feeling word, I don't know that I'm angry. And I'm pretty sure that's probably because just this whole past year of, just COVID and George Floyd and just living in Georgia and just being in a very toxic place. So angry sounds like the right word that I want to hear myself say, but I don't know that I'm actually feeling that way. Only because, like I shared, but other things that resonated with me really was the level of detail. Like there was a lot of wow moments in there. Like I had watched movies like Rosewood. I had watched movies like Mississippi Burning and all these movies. My pastor growing up was I'm from Missouri, from St. Louis, but he is was very big in the whole Oral Roberts community. Graduated. It's one of the Presbyterian members that's kind of like I can't think what it is. I was going to say a founder, but not. He's like one of Oral Roberts' kind of proteges, if you will. And so we knew about the history, but not to the level of degree when you think about 40 to now half a block or some of the details and, you share with the young man. And the other part, the last piece that kind of resonates with me, and I wrap my minute up here is that I almost struggle with where now, what do we do with this information? Yes, I do feel like there is a injustice, if you will, like listening to that pastor, there's a grave injustice for this history to be wiped out. But I also think about the young people that I work with, my own nieces and nephews, you know, and I think it's a miss on our generations, our early generations, but all they care about is cars and houses. You know, if you know, they don't want to hear the message. That's what my ancestors went through. So those are the kind of things that kind of you know, as I'm watching, you know, my mind is going up and down in reactions that I'm having to that piece. But it was a very powerful piece and my first time seeing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So just for those, if you joined us if you joined us after I said it, if someone is talking and you want to be next in line, if you just type stack in the chat, then I'll call on you. And so first we'll have Josh Roth.
And I will say this is actually Gwen. This is my husband's computer, but
okay, that works.
Yeah, that's fine. I will have to obviously reiterate what Ginger said, and I'm pushing 50, white woman, and did not ever hear the words Tulsa Massacre until about 3.5, 4 years ago, which to me is absolutely appalling. But then I look at like the generational wealth, and all of my ancestors, just my grandparents are all immigrants. And to see what they have built in this country in 3 generations, to me is just, I stand on their shoulders. And to me, it's just absolutely amazing to see the wealth that was in Tulsa at the time. And now it's gone to the African-American community. And I don't know what reparations look like, but when that mayor was like, I don't know where the cash has come from, we're America, we have money. Like, I mean, there has to be some kind of monetary reparation to these entire families, because going from 40 blocks with 600 African-American businesses to what they say 20 now is just frankly appalling.
One half of one block.
Right. It's appalling.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Really quickly, and then Robin, one of the things that I'm passionate about is when we talk about Tulsa and others is, you know, I'm quick to say the wealth was stolen. It was plundered. It was government sanctioned theft. And I say that because it can be easy for us, and when I say us, I mean me, to look at that as a historical thing, as something that happened and it's over. But like the commentator said, you know, her grandparents owned $100,000 company 100 years ago. That would be hundreds of millions of dollars now. And some of the videos I'm going to send you later, it talks about the land that some of these people lived on that had oil. The government said Black people didn't have basically the intellect to oversee that wealth. So there were white, I can't think of the word that was used, basically like custodians that would be placed over them to watch their wealth. And then, but these Black intellectual citizens came together with the help of the NAACP and attorneys and said, no, you know, this is ours. You can't just come in and take what's ours or take our children's wealth. And so we just see over and over and over again. And that was before the massacre. And even after the massacre, when it was rebuilt, gentrification and urban revitalization and putting the interstate in, all of those took wealth away from those people. And it was stolen. And now when the mayor says, I don't know where the money's coming from, and then you see all this progress and all these buildings going up, like, where did that money come from? Like, what we can find money to do all kinds of stuff. So I just wanted to put that out there, that whenever people, you know, whenever we talk about this type of thing, remember this was theft. It was theft. Robin. Maybe you're on mute. Up. There we go. I'll just following along with one thing you mentioned earlier, thinking a lot about how powerful, it's all good, how powerful and dangerous white women really are, and how we don't acknowledge that most of the time. Maybe I need to check myself more too, speaking as a descendant of Japanese American immigrants who got payments and were able to prosper. Absolutely, cash reparations matter, absolutely. Not to discount grandpa's hard work, but it would have been that much harder if we could figure out that. Why can't we figure this out? And that's I'm going to talk about HR 40 later, but right now it's just a really good point just to touch on it, that for the first time in over 30 years since we've been, since a congressperson has been bringing up it's called HR 40. It's a bill just to study what reparations would look like. Mind you, this is not a bill that would give people money. It's a bill that would study. And this is the first time it's ever got out of committee. Like, isn't that crazy? Like, literally, the government doesn't even want to study what reparations could look like. And so I think that's why this is a federal bill, and it's this year the president is supporting it. It came out of committee. That means it's going to be on the floor. There's going to be discussion. And that's something, like when people always ask me, what can we do? What can we do? This is something we could do. Talk to your congressperson and talk not only to your congressperson, but talk to those elected officials and see where they stand on the study of what this would mean. I have some slides I'll show you before we get out. But when you look at the wealth divide, one of the ones I'm going to show you in Boston, the average net worth of a white family is $250,000. The average net worth of a Black family is $8, less than $10. And that goes back to property ownership and wealth. And so if my grandfather, who fought in Korea, wasn't able to buy land when he came back with his VA loan, the government in certain areas would not let Black people get loans, like would not cut them out of that. And so how do you build generational wealth? How do you build generational wealth in Tulsa, where you literally, every time you build or you buy or you do something, if the government comes in and takes it, it's something that we really have to look at. How many people, the first time you heard about Tulsa, you can let me know in the chat, or if your video is on, just from a hand raise, was literally in the past year? Like, there was a first time you heard about Tulsa. And I'm not surprised by that at all. Because not only was it government sanctioned theft and vandalizing and killing, because remember, the police officers deputized citizens to go into pawn shops, take their guns, and go to get the Black people to fall in line. All of this happened because those Black individuals had the audacity to see themselves as somebody, had the audacity to want to protect their community, protect their own, exert their freedom and independence. And what the message that was sent was, stay in your place. Stay in your place. Now, true story, true fact, the only reparations or restitution paid after Tulsa was to the pawn shop owners, to those owners of the gun stores where those, because they broke in windows, took ammunition, took what they needed. Also, true story, one of the planes used was owned by an oil company in Tulsa that loaned the plane so that they could drop those turpentine bombs on people's houses. So this is government and private cooperation to keep these people in their place. And so whenever people say stuff like, oh, the government wouldn't do this, or, that's not the case now, never, ever be surprised what people will do for money. Never, ever be surprised. Also understand that there were lots of Black people that stayed in Tulsa. So when it happened, they bombed their houses, they were taken to these internment camps, 6,000 of them. There's only about 11,000 people that live there. They're taken to these internment camps for months. So that left people the opportunity to go to their homes and to take anything that was valuable. So when people return, women would be walking down the street and see a white woman wearing their coat or their hat, or someone, their furniture, their jewelry, all of that was stolen. And they had to rebuild. And the government says, well, if you rebuild, you have to follow all these rules and it has to be flame retardant. But then when they would go to the building supply companies would not sell flame retardant equipment to Black people. Again, they're working in concert, trying to get this to happen. So the blessing was that attorney, B.C. Franklin, set up a Red Cross tent with a brick floor, and there's a really beautiful picture of him with the secretary, an associate, a old school Andy Griffith phone, you pick it up, in a Red Cross tent with a brick floor, doing, people's paperwork. He told people, go to your houses, set up a tent, table, whatever you need to do, stake out your land, and we're going to fight this in court. And for the most part, they won, they rebuilt. And then by the 1940s, it was more thriving than it was in the 1920s. But then by the 1960s, with the interstate and urban revitalization, or as James Baldwin would call Negro removal, it all happens again. What do we, go ahead, Lynette. It's all good.
So you asked us to think about what actions for like now. The very least is this could be taught in school. I mean, I'm 65 and never heard of it until 2020. My daughter more recently went to school. She's 30, never heard of it. So this is not even, Black History Month is, there were slaves and now they're free. And so it's all good. And Martin Luther King, yay. And we got to fix that. I mean, the very least is that more of this information, not that it's a favorable look for America, but it's the truth. And you got to teach the truth. I'll shut up now.
No, that's perfect. I was looking through my notes. Anyone else?
There are a couple people on Stack.
Awesome, thank you.
Beth?
Oh, hi. I can't figure out how to get my audio to work right now.
I can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to add, like what Lynette said, like we need to teach it in school. I completely agree, but like, I went to the museum down in Montgomery, Alabama, the lynching. The name is the International Peace and Justice Memorial, and they have a museum nearby. And I loved American history, so I actually paid attention in that class, and was standing there in the lobby reading just the, it's the waiting area before you go in. And I was like shocked because I didn't even know, I was so ignorant. I didn't even know that they were stealing Black people from free Black people and sending them down the river, right? Like that's where that phrase came from. So, I mean, I think it's there is a, they're trying to hide information. And now look at the fact that we don't even want to talk about the fact that, white privilege is something. Now we're going to even have less racial education in schools than we ever had before, right? So I think that teachers may be really nervous about what they can and can't teach now, considering with all of what's going on about critical race theory, and most of the people who are against it, I think, don't even know what it is. But it just really makes me frustrated that it feels like how do you hide a massacre like this Tulsa? I mean, how can you hide that in some of these other events? I mean, it's like intentional. And if we don't learn from our past, it will be repeated. So I'm just really frustrated that it seems like we're trying to, I don't know how to break through to get that we can actually start to make sure that the generation coming up learns about these things in school. So that's it. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you so much, Beth. And I think something to note is that we really need to be writing our state representatives, because it's these states that are deciding what is taught in that particular state. It's also paying attention to school board and paying attention to all these. One of the things that I'll bring up later when we talk about what the action is understanding that it's at every level, it's at every single level, from writing your home or in your level of influence all the way up to the White House. But there's a lot of steps before we get there. And so the state representatives and the education boards in our states have a lot of power, and that propaganda controls what information gets to our young people. Meg, you're on Stack.
Sure. I think, if we think about teachers teaching this and handing them some document, here's the curriculum for this age level or whatever, those teachers are going to know even less than the people on this call, right? And that's going to be a little bit independent of race, because the structure of the universities for teaching teachers does not help our student teachers to understand, why would you teach this? See, we're trying to understand, as you said, Derek, from the very beginning, race, rage, and fear. We're trying to understand the systems of white supremacy. Teachers are not. I mean, as a group, there are many, many individual teachers who are and would love the help, but they're not going to get it at the local teacher training program. So a lot of what has to happen is what we're doing. I mean, I think in communities all over the United States, there are these kinds of neighborhood pedagogical efforts. Everybody's reading books and watching documentaries, and white, black, older, younger, and talking to their nieces and talking to their own kids. And that in a way that the revolution is happening in these rooms. And then the teachers are going to say, I demand that you give me these materials. And if you don't, I will make them myself. Because it's not, I mean, if I was a teacher and I was just told, well, just teach the facts, I know I wouldn't be helping anyone understand why it happened. And Derek, that's why your whole background, where you focused on systems through the whole thing, like they were waiting for a reason to move these folks north. And this happened, like that's the underlying thing. So just teaching that white people, basically declared war on Black people and murdered them, is going to confuse students. It's like, well, what the hell did they do that for? That, are white people just terrible people? Are Black people just helpless victims? I mean, that's not what we want them to teach. We want them to teach why. Because that's what helps us understand the same decisions we're making today. You know, like the Supreme Court just decided that labor organizers can't go on private property to talk to migrant workers about their rights as workers. I mean, that's absolutely, you know, that's what keeps, you know, the revolution from happening.
Yep.
That people can't get together, they can't protect their rights. People die from, you know, workplace conditions, and we still have a white power structure in place that makes sure that they can't fight back, and that none of the money from the corporations, you know, is going to be used as taxes for the infrastructure plan. And I mean, it's all, that's what we want people to learn from this, is how are we still doing this today? End of rant.
Absolutely. TK.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to expand on what Megan was sharing. I absolutely 100% agree. So my background is in HR, and I started in education, and I'm from St. Louis. I shared. So I worked in a school district, one of these school districts that had in the entire country in the States, the last existing volunteer inter-district transfer programs where we bus inner city kids out to the county schools. And so our school district was a very old school district, and that probably a third of our teachers actually grew up in the community, were now teachers and support staff in the community. And so you can just imagine just the ingrained places of thought, and to Meg's point, where, you know, long story short, our superintendent got a brain tumor, and usually those types of life experiences allow you to have C moments, significant emotional, you know, events, where the school district start taking a shift and start really leading the way for other school districts, the city of St. Louis and all these other places, to start bringing in consultants to have this work. And to Meg's point, we had so many challenges, because to come in and tell a young teacher that, you know, just doesn't understand that why that child is so loud and so have what they deem as behavioral issues is really a socialization of that child. And so there's so many dynamics, and Repertoire, you were talking about just the systems, you know, just the education policy and all of that that's being forced on the teacher. So there's just so many dynamics. And that leads me into the point where I was sharing, and you were asking about our reactions. In that, yes, I believe we have to get educated, because if we don't, we repeat. You know, and I believe Tulsa is still happening. You know, it's happening in our prison system, the explosion of prison system, in the just the dismantling, the breakup of families, and it's happening in just where I am, judicial systems, where we vote for our district attorney, but yet the power says no, we're gonna usurp that, and we're gonna pick the district attorney. And so just all of these, you know, maintaining of these powers and things like that, you know, I sometimes we can say, let's go and teach it in the schools, but we also have to think what that means, because there's a lot to that. Because I can tell you, I have challenges having these kind of conversations with my own nieces and nephews. Right. They are more progressive in thought than we are, as it relates to race relations. And so we have to be creative, or we can't just go and say, now the curriculum is going to be about Tulsa, Rosewood, and all these other places. I do think COVID and George Floyd has given us a window and an opportunity. And I think that space was ordained, unfortunate, but ordained. But I just think I end on is that we have to get creative in a way that it invites our young people, because I definitely think if anybody's going to change it, it's going to be them, because I think we failed them. But we have to invite them to the conversation and telling them that because your ancestor, you know, people stole your generational wealth and all. I'm just going to be frank with you. They don't want to hear it, and that's just the reality. And that, you know, to some of what Meg shared as well, it's just that we don't have the people helping usher that conversation, and they don't have the skills to be able to usher that conversation.
I make a note of that, because I have commentary and thought on our young people and what we do with that. I want Christy, who has a hand up, to share. Thank you so much, TK.
I this is an interesting conversation. The reason I wanted to kind of comment was because I didn't want to I think it's important that we teach it in school, and it's good for, everybody to kind of know that this happened. But, like a couple other people have insinuated, a lot of situations have happened. So, I think, yes, we need to, kind of begin to teach it in schools, but we need to prepare the world for the kids that we're teaching these new skills and these new, ways too. So, it might sound radical, like we need to like tear down the system and restart it. But if we're teaching people that this is what happened in 1921, and hey, by the way, this was not nice and we need to avoid it. But then we are 6 months from the insurrection and everybody's like, well, did anything really happen? Let's, I'm not sure if anything really happened yet. And it's like, let's just be real. Something happened. It was, our capital was defiled, and somebody other than those little people that showed up with their flags should be accountable for it. So I'm all for, giving the teachers and teaching them a curriculum. I'm sure we have a lot of intelligent people that could develop curriculum, to give the teachers to, but at the same time, we can't keep saying, oh, well, let's teach it in schools. Let's make sure we teach. No, I'm kind of understanding of our millennials who are tired of hearing about slavery. They're tired of hearing about, quote, this person that's trying to keep them down, because they're not thinking like that anymore. Their mentality is not there. They are past the mentality, but America and the Constitution, we failed. I'm going to say we failed to give them like a structure that is now compatible with their new ways of thinking and their new, because the kids are integrated. They don't care about color. They don't care. They are all, they're all on social media. They are living through things that are very external. They're not very, checking in with their internal, but it is our job as, the adults in the situation to start to create an environment that they can, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do so that Tulsa doesn't happen again? What are we going to do? I am tired of living in the whitewashed America where, you don't understand that I might not have gas this week. You don't understand the check life. It's certain things that, my manager doesn't understand. He's like, why are you always so angry? I'm like, I live check to check, boo. Like, I'm wondering how gas gonna work at the end of next time. And so, but these types of concepts, when you have somebody who's on the other side of the table that doesn't understand the check to check life, and they don't understand, they're like, oh, you should have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps already. You should have came up. Like, when in all actuality, we tried, you knocked us down in Tulsa, you knocked us down. And, there's a lot of different times that, it's just like, knock down, get back up, knock down, get back up. And we have to stop. We got to stop. I feel like we just need to stop learning about it, and we really need to like do about it. Like,
thank you so much, Christy. One of the things that what Christy was discussing, and one of the things TK, who had to leave but offered some awesome commentary in the chat as well, is it made me think of my own upbringing. So I'm 37, from Louisville, Kentucky, and I was blessed and fortunate enough to have a family and a support system that was pretty middle class, pretty educated, but understood where the gaps were that I would encounter as a Black man, right? So picture it, 4th grade, my birthday party, or 3rd grade, let's start there. My birthday party, I have a big party at the house. All my friends from school come. There's no white kids in the group because I'm in the advanced placement program. I'm the only Black kid in my class. So my grandmother says, where are your Black friends? And I'm like, they're not in my, I don't have any Black friends. They're not in my class, this is what I got. So you know, spend the night over people's house. They spend the night over my house. This is my best friend. They're all white. And my family says, well, we need to get him in some programs and activities where he can be around other people that look like him, because they wanted me to get a total, you know, an experience outside of just the white world. And at first I hated it because I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know what to do. And, you know, the style of dress was different and talk was different and all these things. But it changed my life because I literally was put in programs like the Black Achievers Program and Jack and Jill and Upward Bound. These are all programs that you had mentors. You went to work with Christy and saw how she navigated her job. And it may be an attorney one day, it may be the manager of a Kroger one day. It was at different levels and different places. We traveled to New York. I saw Black wealth. I saw Black working class, but I really got to like get into spaces, not my parents, not my, you know, aunts and uncles, but other people at church or other people in the community, where I got to see opportunities in a way of life that I may not have been able to see. And it's like, no matter how awesome your parents are and how awesome your teacher is, there's something different about seeing it and experiencing it for yourself. And I think that is so important. I think Tulsa is important for our young people to learn, to see what, just to get that idea, like that this was possible then. And so much of what Black people have had to do in history is not just navigate entrepreneurial difficulties, but navigate the government and navigate those systems that block us. And then once you hear those stories and once you see those things, and, you know, I remember going to the Herndon Mansion in Atlanta with a group, you know, with that a bunch of Black kids, you know, they took us to these places and seeing this mansion that these Black people built. And they were, I think he was a barber, but what he was able to do, and to go to these college campuses and see this college that was built by chauffeurs and maids so that, you know, their children could be educated. It does something that reading about it and talking about it and watching videos, it was like actually going there in community. And yeah, we were goofy and stupid and, you know, but it planted seeds that Black excellence, like that whole idea. Like, I remember being in college and thinking, if my grandmother, Black from a rural community in Kentucky, can graduate from college in 1928, there's no excuse, because I knew her story. I knew where she came from. I knew what she did. But I also saw it. Like, I saw the cabin that she grew up in, and I had that feeling. And that's one of the things I think that we miss sometimes, especially in this social media driven society where so many of our kids, you know, social media, you get to project the image or the brand that you want people to experience of you, right? So if I create a 30-second TikTok, I'm giving you a snapshot of what I want you to experience in that moment. And it's very managed. And so it's really easy for kids to, a lot of them are all about, you know, making money and having the cars and the this and the that. And that's because they're, you know, going on TikTok, going on Instagram, seeing these images and, oh, I want that, oh, I want that. But when you actually take people to experience and to see and be saturated in that, like, I can't wait to go to Tulsa and see it for myself. I saw when I went to the National Museum of African American Heritage and Culture, or in Washington, I was standing in line to see the Emmett Till casket. And there were two young Black teenagers in front of me, because there was a line. That's the only exhibit there's a line to see Emmett Till's casket. And they're like, what are we in line for? And she's like, I don't know, but it must be good because, you know, all these people are in line. And then I said, oh, it's Emmett Till's casket, right? And they were like, what's that? So I start telling them the story, and you go through, and going through the casket is almost like going into a funeral. Because you go in, they're playing sad music, and they have pictures and quotes, and these girls are reading and looking, and one of them gets tears in her eyes, right? And I have tears in my eyes. And I'm like, 5 minutes ago, they had no idea who Emmett Till was. But someone thought it important to bring them to this museum. They stood in line because all the rest of us stood in line. And they've just had an awakening that will forever change their lives. And so I think Meg is right. Like meetings like this, it's in the small stuff, but we can't get distracted. Sometimes the problem looks so big that we feel like we can't do anything. But doing this type of stuff and doing those small things really does plant seeds and bring about change. Anyone else before I share these last few slides that I have? Is there any stacks? I'm bad at paying attention sometimes. Ginger, do you mind? Ginger's an attorney. I'm just going to ask really quickly, do you mind giving us and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, so if you do, don't worry, giving us a definition of a reparation or restitution?
Sure. So restitution, and I'm talking the criminal law.
Right.
Yeah. So when somebody is found guilty of a crime, the judge can order restitution, and that is basically making the victim of the crime whole. So whatever was taken from that victim, restitution is meant to repay them, yes, but it's a little bit more than that. It's to make them whole again.
Thank you so much, because that's one of the,
welcome. That's
one of the things that we've since Tulsa. That's one of the things that people have been discussing is, what is it? Is it are we seeking restitution to recover all that happened, that being made whole, but then also the reparations, like what that means in relation to the theft and the pain, because it's not just about, like, sometimes we think about, oh, that was sad that they went through that, they were shot, their property was burned, like what that does to them traumatically, and that's true, that is a trauma. But there was also theft involved, so we have to think about that as well. I have these slides that I want to show, and then we'll close out. Why this is driving me crazy. I'm missing a menu, so it's making everything annoying. All right. So we talked about that. So these are some of the statistics that I wanted us to see. So this is from Forbes, from Prosperity Now Institution for Policy Studies. And this projection of wealth to 2024. So the blue is white people, red is Black people, orange is Latinx people. And the projection by 2024 is that the white net worth about $122,000, Latinx net worth around $1,633, Black people $1,233. One of the things that when we talk about the frustration and what we've seen with individuals like on January 6th, as you see, there's a drop in white wealth that took place, looks like around 2008. Remember the market crash of 2008? And so that of course, pissed off a lot of us. If you had stocks, if you were like me, you didn't even want to look at them around there. And some people haven't recovered. So losing that bit of wealth, of course, has angered and frustrated that group. But when you look historically at the Black and the Latinx projections, I mean, $1,000. Think about that you work and your assets, your home, your all those things that have value, your retirement, subtract your debts in $1,000. So you're working for the rest of your life, right? You're counting on Social Security in a way that perhaps other people aren't. This is the average wealth for families that were born between 1943 and 1951. So we're talking boomers, right? We're talking retirement age. Unfortunately, those surveys, the Latinx sample was too small in this survey to get a sample. But look at the difference. So when Black people, white people were in their 30s and 40s, there was 3 times, white people had 3 times the average family wealth. 60s and 70s, we see 10 times, 7 times the average family wealth. So again, $203,000 compared to $1.3 million. So we're talking about generational wealth, right? We're also talking about the percentage of people that have to go into nursing facilities. If you don't have the wealth to pay, getting older is expensive, right? So if you don't have the money, some of these assisted living nursing homes are on the cheap end, $7,000, $8,000 a month, probably averaging $11,000, $12,000 a month. So if you don't have that, you have to go on Medicaid, right? What happens when you go on Medicaid? All of your assets, your house, your car, your income, all but a few $100s is gone. And so there's nothing to leave your family. There's no house. And so I've had members that have lived in assisted living places, and their families had the ability to pay those 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Atria was a big company that offers senior living. They have senior living houses in New York and DC that are $24,000 a month. But you're closer to having that if you have $1.3 million versus 203. And before you move into those facilities, they'll look at how much you have and they'll determine whether or not you can afford. They'll sell all your stuff, use your money first, then Medicaid comes in. Here's the statistic I talked about earlier when we were talking about Boston. This just came out a couple weeks ago. Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, The Color of Wealth in Boston, publication with Duke University and the New School. Total assets, $700. Net worth, $8. What do you do with that? If you don't have property, you can't take out a home equity line of credit. If you don't have property, you're limited to the amount of money that you have and the credit that you can get based on the amount of money that you have. And so I wanted to share those. A couple of definitions there don't want to get into. When we talk about plunder, these are some of the ways that we've seen in the history of America, collecting taxes from Black people and not giving them the same right to those government services. Collecting taxes from Black people and refusing to allow them to have a say in who is elected what happens with those. And of course, terrorizing and enforcing and controlled. And when there was a woman in the video who said, you know, why didn't Black people talk about what happened in Tulsa? And she said it was too painful to relive. I would argue it was also the terror of what would happen if you spoke out. One of the videos I'm going to send you, a young man goes to the library to do research. This is 30 years ago on Tulsa, and the microfilm of those days was deleted. They were literally trying not to get that information out. And so if you have the very people that got a plane and bombed your house and shot you and burned your property and stole from you, you're still living in community with them. So Black people who stayed in order to rebuild, there is a terror of what happens if we talk. And again, remember, this is taking place during the lynching era of our country. And so it wasn't just, oh, that was painful, even though it was, but it was also dangerous. It was extremely dangerous because the whole point of Tulsa, of Rosewood, of all those riots was to keep you in your place, to keep you in your place. I've given this example before, but I love giving this example. There's a home, I don't know how many people are in Cincinnati, and actually this would be different now. This is in College Hill. I don't think you can get a house in College Hill now for 80 grand. But this house, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath in one neighborhood, and a very similar house in a different neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, but depending on the neighborhood, determines how much you pay. And so I've always said my grandfather was only able to buy a house in one neighborhood in 1960 in Louisville after, you know, fighting the Korean War, living with my grandmother in an apartment for a few years. But because he was relegated to one area, those homes now go for $100,000. Whereas his white counterparts were able to buy in neighborhoods where houses now are selling for $300,000 or $400,000 for the same house that my grandfather bought. So look at the difference. So when they leave their $400,000 house to their family, my grandfather leaves his $100,000 house to us. Look at the difference. Look at the difference in that wealth. So we talk about what can we do? HR 40, huge. Also, make sure you harass your state representatives about what you need, what you want the school board. We must work on all levels. I also do think it is important to support Black businesses and institutions, but I don't think it's enough just to buy from them. Support with your vote, in your activism, those people and those policies that make it easier for marginalized and oppressed peoples to thrive. Work within your influence. What I mean by that is whatever your sphere of influence is, if you're a teacher, if you're a volunteer for an organization, if you're an attorney, whatever, if you're a business owner, whatever board you sit on, places you are, use that level of influence to help create change. Here's all my social media. It seems like a lot. It's Reverend Derek Terry on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. Also have a Patreon called Race, Rage, and Fear that we do this type of stuff for patrons. Support the work, and I have videos and activities and things that I do just for those people. And if you're willing to invest and to help with some of the work that I'm doing, you can do that starting at a $3 level on that website. I also pastor St. Peter's Church here in Cincinnati, a pretty awesome, open-minded, contemplative spiritual center. And we have in-person service on Sundays at 11 And we also stream on Facebook. And of course, you can contact me at revderekterry@gmail.com. And my website for in-person or virtual speaking events. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll give you all this information in an email to follow, but we have 8 minutes left. Did anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you would like to share?
I just want to say thank you. The first one of these I went to was back when we were all in person. I think it was like in 2018. And I've learned so much from you, and I really appreciate you, and I want you to know that.
Well, thank you. You and my favorite people.
Oh.
So that feels really good to hear. I really, really, really appreciate that. Anyone else?
Thank you for doing this work.
Thank you, Gwen. So this was fun. I always spend like a week preparing for these, and I get all nervous and hyped up. And so I'm just really, really, really grateful to you all for showing up. I also have a book club that we meet once a month. We read a book. It's usually by a Black writer. For the most part, they've mostly been Black female writers, to tell you the truth. And for this month, for Pride Month, we're reading Audre Lorde. I can't think of the name of it now, but her autobiography. And we're meeting next Wednesday, so on the 30th of June. And so that gives you enough time to read it. And I'll make sure you get that in the email if you're interested. But thank you all so much for getting on. And we'll be doing another one of these pretty soon. And we're getting out early, so got 6 extra minutes. Thank you all again, all right?
Thank you, Derek. It was wonderful.
Oh, and I'll send you the chat, and I'll send you all the stuff I told you I was going to send you later. So thank you all so much. You all take care, okay?